session, Big Data and Analytics, Hype versus Reality. Let's get started.
Thanks, Ayman. So before I start, I was told that this is the first time this topic was being introduced in TiECON, and I just want to take a second and appreciate and thank the organizers for having this such a topic into this conference. And one of the things I was told is that make sure that we get something to learn from it. And so as I was looking at the morning sessions, right, I mean, there's a lot of things that came to my mind as to how closely linked and integrated such a topic is to everything that we do in our daily lives, right? And today is a world of data explosion. And everything that we do is connected socially, physically, virtually. You know, if I sit back and say I can paint a profile of you without you knowing it, down to your habits and predict where you're going to go, you wouldn't believe me. But today we can do that, right? And so the field is rapidly evolving. Recently one of the co-founders of Apple was in India, right? And he stirred a big controversy by saying that Indians are not creative. Now, when you look at, somebody talked about Jugaad. Jugaad is the highest form of creativity, I think. And I think nobody beats Indians for Jugaad. There are issues. We have IP issues, a lot of things. But when you look at the field of analytics, I think that you look at some of the tools and look at the names they have given to those tools. And you tell me if they're creative. A pig, Python, right? Are these creative names, guys? They are animal names, right? So we asked them to be more creative. They came out with Mahout, Impala, still animal names, right? So, but I think what we want to focus on the session, we got a pristine panel here, is to remove some of the smoke from the screen and take some of those terms out of our sort of jargon, right? And really focus on what is it that this field offers to us, to the business people, to the entrepreneurs, to the industry, to academia, and how we can benefit from something like this. So let me just introduce you the panelists here. And each one of them comes with between 10 and 20 years of experience in their own field. They're experts. Debjit, Hindol, and Akash are here. They represent academia and industry. I will just ask them to introduce themselves and speak a little bit about themselves. Yeah.
Hello. First of all, thank you, TiECON and Rajeev, to get me here. It is wonderful interacting with the fantastic audience out here. So I'm Debjit, as he has already been introduced, and my background really goes back about 20 years back when I started with G and Analytics. I think we were one of the first analytics companies in India that goes back to 2000. And post that, I have been involved with a lot of research using data and all. And particularly, I've been focusing on 3 to 4 verticals. One is e-commerce, the other is the trucking sector, and the third is the service operations sector, which is restaurants. So today we'll be having interaction, and several of my examples are going to come from those particular sectors.
Hi, my name is Hindol Basu. I lead a company called Actify Data Labs. We are in the machine learning and AI space, particularly in the healthcare sector. And I have been fortunate to work with Rajeev a lot earlier. Thanks everyone for inviting me for this exciting opportunity. Before anything else, I just wanted to share a quick bit about my life. The reason I came into this thing, which is called data science ML today, earlier it used to be called analytics. I came into this because of 9/11. What happened was I graduated from IIM Bangalore in 9/11 with a specialization in finance, trying to get a job in banks. Obviously, I was on the road without a job. And someone at Citi told me there is this new thing called analytics coming up. Do you want to risk your career there? I said, I will. It's better, at least a job is a good thing. And even the HR told me, this is things which mostly statisticians do. You're going to ruin your career. So we stuck to it. These days it has become important. We'll talk a little bit about the journey.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Akash. I come from a company called eClinicalWorks, and we are one of the biggest healthcare companies in the world. We automate hospitals and give them electronic medical records. We'll talk about, I think it's a very interesting session about, what exactly we've delivered so far in terms of technology and, analytics and AI and everything. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. So we got a good representation both from academia and the industry side. I think the first question I would ask Hindol and Debjit as to maybe if you can give the audience a sense of all these different terms of machine learning, right? Business intelligence, AI, there's a lot of hype, a data scientist. Analytics, there's a lot of hype behind this, right? And somebody said that this is the sexiest job of the 21st century. So can you just get it down to reality as to what really is analytics? And before we set the stage for use cases and applications, and then help the audience understand, okay, what does it really mean, right? Are you a different breed altogether, or are you just one of the daily people that tries to sort of understand what things are, right? So maybe we start with Hindol and then get to Debjit.
Rajeev, thanks a lot. That's a great question. And I always, when I reflect about it, you hear a lot of jargon. You hear jargons around machine learning, AI, data science, artificial intelligence. Do you know something? Who was the first data scientist in the world? This used to be a person who lived precisely 2,500 years ago. This was a person named Thales, who used to live in Greece before Socrates. You know what he did? He used what we call time series forecasting today. He used that to forecast demand for olive oil. And then he used what we call option pricing today to rent out all the olive oil presses. And then he became one of the wealthiest person in ancient Greece by the power of analytics. So analytics is precisely a 2,500-year-old discipline. The first neural network, which is one of the machine learning things that we all talk about today, you know when it was first used? 1962, to figure out or filter out noises in telecom network. We all talk about recommender systems of Amazon. You know when the first recommender system was used? 1992. It was a system called Tapestry used by Netflix. So precisely none of this is as new and as cutting edge as we all think. So the essential idea is that can we use data for driving business outcomes? And the business outcomes finally are just two, either revenue or cost. Can we somehow use data to either enhance revenue or reduce cost? That's pretty much the art and science of all of that we talk about. So in this, data is like my raw material that I take in. I put a method to it to extract learnings out of it. That method can be a simple pivot table in an Excel sheet. That can be a regression that you fit on a chart. That can be neural network. That can be deep learning. That can be anything. That's not the important part. The important part is I see a lot of data. For example, if I see a lot of data here, and if I see everyone wearing a white shirt is rich. So that is a model. That is a machine learning model. So tomorrow, if I see a person in white shirt, I will put this learning of the model that he is rich, and therefore I will pitch a Mercedes instead of a Alto to him as a car. So that's essentially what it is.
Thank you. Debjit?
Yeah, I think I hope I'm not. Yeah, Rajeev.
I have a white shirt.
You're a white shirt, Rajeev.
That's how I pop.
That's the
okay.
hypothesis. Okay. No, I think I agree to him. I think to put it in few words, what analytics is all about, you have some data, you generate a lot of data, you have a few number of records that you capture from your business transactions. And how do you discover relationships between the data, right? So if you want to use data to generate additional revenue for your business, can you come up with simple rules saying that, again, going back, say the customers who come in the weekends should be targeted for this particular product, right? So again, it again comes back, how do you leverage the information that you're generating in your business and creating new business models? And that's important. When you talk about business model, what you're saying is that how can you leverage data to generate additional revenue because the data exists now, which was not possible earlier to do at all, right? So that additional term, which is not a jargon really, it is called the model personalization. How can you personalize or target the right population or right particular customer based on the additional data? I think analytics is all about model personalization. How can I personalize and cross-sell or personalize and generate additional revenue or personalize and generate additional decisions for your business?
Thank you, Debjit. So I think that brings us to the next question in this topic about, there's people who try and who aspire to become analysts, right? And you painted a picture of the linkage between data and business. And we'll talk about data a little bit more. But before we get into that as to what data and how it creates an ROI, maybe I'll point this question to Akash from a business perspective, looking at an analyst, right? And looking at it from a sales growth perspective, looking at it from a different revenue generation perspective, as you pointed out, right? And you can take your industry, which is healthcare. What would you ask of an analyst? What makes a good analyst according to the business? Yeah.
Sure, great. And I'll quickly add to what you guys have already portrayed. So we accumulate a lot of data, and I'll talk in terms of the healthcare industry, right? There's so much of data that already has been accumulated, and we need now people who can mine the data really well, which is why there are data scientists, there are data analysts. At the end of the day, say we provide software which basically is helping the physicians to take good decisions at the point of care. At the end of the day, when they take these good decisions, it all boils down to the kind of data which was shown to them, right? Which was really mined well, which was really accumulated well. So that, amalgamation and amplification of the data is what is now required by the analyst at this point of time. And which is what I would say, can be a good takeaway for the team here, that every industry has data. It is getting accumulated, but is it structured? Are you using it properly or not? Are the right questions that you should ask an analyst to present in the front.
No, absolutely. Thank you. So that triggers a thought. ये data का ROI क्या है? Maybe Debjit, you can take a shot at it. What is the ROI of data? What is the economic value of data? We'll start there. Yeah.
Let me take a use case to illustrate that. As I mentioned earlier, I come from this logistics kind of vertical. And we have been working quite a bit with the trucking industry from the last 6-7 years. So all of you have used the term GPS. Probably all of you heard the GPS, which is the global positioning system. GPS people use to track whether there is a thief around, where is my truck stuck, whether the truck has reached the customer premise. That was the value of GPS used historically. Even till date, most of you use for that reason only. But what we do not know is that the GPS emits information every 2 seconds. You get to know about the driver. You get to know about the hard acceleration of the driver, whether taking a hard deceleration, whether the driver is closing his eyes, whether he's yawning, whether he's in influence of alcohol, for instance, right? So the economic value of the data of which is generating every bits and pieces in every seconds can be used to improve driver safety. Now think about it, India has 150,000 truck accidents every year. Not only that, with every truck accident, we lose 10 to 15 crores of goods that is being transferred. Think about the value of that, right? So when you try to that, what we see is the immense value. Again, it is model personalization. The next is economic value comes with dynamic models. What is static versus dynamic? I'm sure all of you analytics enthusiasts here would have developed model at some point in time. Yeah, all of you have developed some models and all. If not, you'll be developing, right? When we talk about models, most of the time we develop something called static models. What are static models? Well, the models we develop one point in time and use it for the next maybe couple of years, right? But now with the advent of data, you'll be able to develop dynamic models. And once you develop dynamic models, again, you can go with personalization. And once you're able to do personalization, you will be able to generate more business value in terms of profits, additional revenues, new business models, and so on and so forth, right? So two things I pointed out. One is in the case of logistics industry, you can see how the data can translate to reduction of accidents in terms of safety. Not only that, how can data be used, for instance, to, I know the previous session they were talking about predictive maintenance, IoT stuff, right? The same thing, how can the data be used to prevent, say, a breakdown of a vehicle, which could have caused tremendous loss and delay on the vehicle. So the customers are getting, instead of today, maybe 3-4 days later. What's the value of time? Time is money, right? So if you're able to save time, you're also able to generate additional revenue for the business.
Thank you. So, excellent. And that's a trigger for the following thought, right? If data, there's economic value to data, then how do we create, how does it drive new business models? If there's a value to an asset, right, it has to drive towards something, right? And maybe Akash and Hindol, you can shed some perspective as to how data, what size of data, I come from the banking industry. We look at transaction data that goes in billions, right? Payments and all kinds of different purchases and lending. And but how should the audience think of using their data to drive new business models?
I can take it. I have, two practical examples on how we have used the data.
Right.
Of course, in the healthcare world.
Yeah.
One is, of course, how the predictive analysis is getting really stronger. And again, here, we give our solutions to the physicians. And there are patients, including me and everyone in the room. We sometimes book an appointment when you have to walk into a physician. And sometimes you just walk in and wait for your turn to come. So what we've developed is that based on my nature of taking appointments, will I actually come on time or not? Will I have a no-show or not? So with this data which I have, I can literally give information to the physicians at the point of care that is this patient going to come on time or not? So there's a lot of value in predictive analysis. And the ROI, at the end of the day, it is affecting your ROI. And you can go back and say, on Monday, I have 50 appointments, but it looks like 20 of them are not even going to show up. So, it kind of helps you in driving those decisions. And I have one more, if we have 30 seconds.
Yeah, we have time.
Right? Yep. There's one bigger, initiative that we have taken at the New York City Department of Health. So all of their 5,000 physicians right now are using our solution. And they accumulated data for almost 4 to 5 years. And the city wanted to find out what can be done to help improve the health of everyone who is living in the city. They found out that there are certain patches in New York City are obese based on all the data of the patient which was accumulated, like the demographic data. And the city went back and saw that there were N number of licenses which are issued of fast food restaurants in that particular, area of New York City. And they converted, they kind of canceled certain licenses, added more healthier chain of restaurants. So, we say it's just, data, but there's just so much it stores, value and, the ROI that it say in both of these examples, it gave to the physician and to the city. Right? And at the end of the day, it was nothing but accumulation of the data. And it was really mined well, or it was really structured well to get the right answers.
So Akash, before we get to Hindol and Debjit, one following question there is, how do you think, so data was always there.
Correct.
It isn't that it's a new phenomenon, right? 30 years ago it was there, 20 years ago it was there, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Right. The way it was captured, perhaps processed, has changed. Do you believe there is a role technology has played here, and what is that role, and how do you see it going forward in your industry? Yeah.
So yes, great question. At the end of the day, it is the technology which is making the difference, right? There's data that we have since years and years, but it's just that it is not captured where, or there are systems who are not interfaced properly. right? The interoperability has never happened, which in the last 5 to 7 years we are seeing that systems are coming together, on some common platforms where you identify your KPIs, that this is what you really want to see, even though you might be using 10 different systems. So that interoperability is what has really kicked in through IT.
Okay, thank you, Akash. So Hindol, the same question, and I guess if you can shed some perspective on your prior point as well, keeping this in mind about how technology enables machine learning. What exactly is it, and how can technology enable that, and what is the value of that? Yeah.
Thanks, Rajiv. Great perspectives, Akash. So I'll possibly start a little bit from where, Akash, you left it. So whenever we try to do anything with data, and we were discussing that in the Industry 4.0 discussion as well, it's very important to focus on something that I just call it value discovery. So what is value discovery? So Rajiv, you spoke about ROI of the data. Now, if by using something to do with the data, there is a certain KPI I'm going to influence. Say a particular KPI called TAT, I will improve by 5%. Now, how much does a TAT improvement of 5% mean either for my revenue or for my cost? It is very, very important that we are able to measure that. And that is the ROI of the data for that particular use case. Now, the interesting thing is the same data may also go into customer satisfaction improvement by 2%, and that will have certain ROI. So it is additive in nature. It's not an asset which can be used for one KPI alone. So the ROI out of data comes through multiple use cases. But anything and everything that we do with data, it is very, very, very important that we look at a KPI that we are trying to influence and measure how much change we are making. Otherwise, it is very, very difficult to go to a CFO and say that sanction X number of rupees or X number of dollars for this particular initiative. So that's one perspective little bit on that. The other thing where technology has helped. So as Rajiv, you mentioned, this data has been there for quite some time. Data, we have been collecting data. So in my limited view, I think technology has helped in a few cases. First of all, technology has helped us connect various systems. Earlier, data used to reside in various systems separately, and we didn't have an efficient way of connecting them. Technology has definitely given us the ability to do that. So therefore, we are able to combine data from various places. And one perspective about this whole data science, it's a joke that I say. All of us have drank fruit juice, right? We have drank fruit juice. What is the biggest determinant of the quality of fruit juice? Is the quality of the fruit. Is not the quality of the mixer, correct? All the machine learning, etc., is the mixer. What we put is the fruit. So the richer the fruit and the more different types of fruit that we put, that is the outcome. Someone spoke about food, you put a little bit of salt, you put a little bit of sugar, the quality of the ultimate food item goes up. So it's the same idea, and that's essentially what we call correlation. If you put all sweets, you're putting correlated things in a dish. So you need to put different things. And technology has given us the ability to connect various types of data. That's one. Two is technology has given us the ability to process data much faster and in a more efficient manner. So because of all this, the big data, the processing technologies, it has become much faster to process. And the last is implementation. Whatever you have got finally is an idea, is a algorithm, is a logic. The logic has to be implemented somewhere. That implementation technology has also become much faster. So for example, if you look at an Amazon, Flipkart, if you look at telematics for cars, if you look at IoT, the platforms for implementing has become much faster. You can implement things at a split-second interval. And last, and this is a question concerning MSMEs that we discussed at the beginning. Earlier, when we started working, some of the technologies for doing this were exorbitantly costly. We used to use a product called SAS for doing our analysis.
And we still do.
And we still use.
In banking, we do that.
And in banking, we still do that. Now the thing is, one desktop license of that used to cost us 2.5 lakh rupees. Today, a lot of that computation power is available in open source at zero cost. Secondly, we needed infrastructure. We needed big servers. And only the banks could afford such servers. Now I can buy that server for 10 minutes, use it and switch it off. So things have become a lot more accessible for companies across the globe. So today, for example, in my organization, we use this the deep learning to look at medical images and to identify anomalies out of medical images. And we are trying to see if we can create a business model of going to tier 2, tier 3 cities in India for automated diagnosis. Now that uses a huge horsepower of a server, a huge GPU machine. But I only switch it off for 3 hours a day. Switch it on for 3 hours, then immediately switch it off. My cost is hardly $1 lakh per month. Earlier, I couldn't afford that at all. So that is the other big technology change which has happened.
So let me interrupt you. Does that mean that Sanjay talked about MSME, right? Do you think these small businesses should now, not just can, should now look into understanding this better to help their businesses, knowing the cost component and how you do this?
Absolutely, Rajeev, absolutely. And the reason for that is, even for an MSME today, all transactions and all work is pretty much digitized. Nothing happens in paper. And digitization means data is getting generated. So therefore, today the wherewithals are exactly available for an MSME to take advantage of it. And because of open source and because of cloud, the risk of trying is very low. Maybe you just waste 5 lakh rupees in trying something, because you are not buying huge servers, you are not buying costly softwares. So the risk of experimentation is absolutely low. And the last point is, if we as technology or data people in India, we do not do it, a Google will do it. A Google will have a platform open where an MSME will just upload data and get all analytics done. Google has already done it. For example, today, every website will have a free GA installed in it, a free Google Analytics installed in it, cost zero. Cost zero. They have already killed all of us out of the web analytics business, and they will do it in all other businesses as well.
Thank you. Interesting. So, maybe Debjit, I heard Akash talk about data having some correlations in the health of the population to the number of licenses, let's say, of fast food, okay? And that sort of brought me to something called spurious correlations, okay? Well, and the audience may not understand it, but I'm sure you as an analyst would understand. In your industry, and perhaps tie it back to, when I say spurious correlations, this is a very valid one, but I'll tell you, if you look at data, you can have many correlations with many things. For example, the GDP of Bangladesh is tied to the sale of butter in Brazil. Now, do you think that's valid? No, but there's a very strong correlation there, and that's a fact, actually. But that's called a spurious correlation. So an analyst and a business has to be very cognizant of that. Can you shed some light on that aspect, and maybe from a logistics perspective?
Sure. So let me take an example, maybe from e-commerce, because all of us, we buy from Amazon and all the electronics websites. So think about when you buy something from Amazon, if there is a sale going on, typically, you'll buy product A and maybe product B. Maybe there is a sale on a particular clothing, and maybe there is a sale on, say, a hardware of a computer, right? Maybe the printer, or maybe a battery, there is a sale. So you buy both of them together because there is deep discounts on both of them, right? And you buy both of them. Now that day, in fact, there is a huge discount. Maybe billions of transactions happened in those two things. Both they bought a clothing, and they also bought a battery for a computer. Now maybe the analyst looking at that, he's saying that, you know what? Those who buy a clothing will also buy a battery. Now, they try to use the information for the warehousing in the back end also, because you want to stock the clothes and the battery next to each other so that they can be fetched together. That is association rules you're trying to develop. But going back to Rajeev, it is spurious, because it just happened that that particular day, these two products were on sale, right? In reality, probably you buy clothing with something else which is more associated. You buy maybe, when you go to a retail shop or maybe go to Hypercity, you buy a beer, then you buy, not in Gujarat, but you buy a beer maybe with peanuts together, right? So this kind of association which always happens may divert under special conditions. And we should be careful on those kind of spurious kind of correlations and not quickly generate some sort of business rules and implement them. We should be careful on that particular aspect.
Yeah. Wonderful. Good. Thank you. So I think, and sticking to that point of data still, I think as data is exploding, and it's not that it's exploding in the last few years. It's, as we said, it's been around for many years. Just different channels. Now digital is out there, social media is out there. And so suddenly you have a whole slew of different kinds of data, and it's very important to filter out what we need to be able to do. But that brings up whole new fields, actually, which is it ethical to be able to use some of this data out there, right? Because some of it can be getting into privacy issues, right? How do you govern that? What is the quality of data? And how do you avoid the spurious correlations? You talked about proprietary versus open source. There's a lot of democratization of tools, but also democratization of data, right? And so a lot of things happening in the field, some very exciting things. But I want to get back to the business side of this and the application level, right? And perhaps maybe the question goes to Akash as to if you think forward, right, and take the healthcare field where you talked about patient care improving, the cost of healthcare reducing, right? Better diagnosis from a physician perspective, right? And historically, it was always sort of limited to the experience of the physician and then the supply chain of healthcare, which was huge. You had HMOs and you had your insurance providers and your drug makers and your physicians and your hospitals. And so it was all broken, it still is. But as you try to get all of the data to be able to optimize and get into where do you see the future headed, and what if somebody's in that industry, what should one look for?
Sure, great question, Rajeev. It just came out of nowhere, but that's why we are here for. I think, yes, with the kind of data which is getting accumulated, it is not only going to help someone sitting on the giving side, which is say the hospital or the physician, especially in the healthcare world, but this data is also going to give a lot of information, knowledge, and decision-making power again in the healthcare world to the patients. Whether should I go to Dr. A or not, whether should I go to Dr. B or not, and why should I go or select one of the other doctor with a preference. So it is kind of going to help both the sides and not just help one of the sides. Importantly, with the healthcare world, the takeaway that I would like to give to the crowd here is that data is going to help in reducing the cost. It is going to help in giving better decision making at the point of care, and at the same time better decision making on the patient side, because now they'll be able to see a lot of other transparency of what is happening with a particular physician, doctor, or a hospital. So I think in the end, there's one more thing I want to add, that with so much of data getting accumulated, the safety concern that you brought up, I think compliance is going to play a huge role in making sure that this data is accurate. In the healthcare field, or it might be any other field, at the end of the day, I think compliance or governance will really kick in hard to make sure that the information provided is really accurate for someone to make or trust that data.
I think if I am the patient, I would sue you if you gave me a wrong diagnosis, right?
Exactly.
Not just if I am alive, that is, right? After the, but that said, maybe in that same context of healthcare, and since Hindol, you are also sort of working in that field now, post your banking experience, do you have any inputs to add there?
So thanks, Rajeev. And Akash, that is an absolute right perspective that you spoke about. Now, just what we are trying to do is build on top of it to see, get into this thing called computer-assisted diagnosis. Now, if you look at it, the medical profession is sort of embodies a set of knowledge which has always been sort of an art cum science kind of a knowledge. So a doctor's diagnosis of anything has been a part art, part science. However, the interesting thing about that is, today if you look at clinical data, for example, data of images, data of heart rates, data of lung function, etc., etc., today it is possible to get a lot of those data in a format where you can have an algorithm work on that. And what that does is that does two things. So one thing that you have noticed is if you have been diagnosed, or if one of your near and dear ones have been diagnosed with a disease, today the first thing that we do is go to internet and figure out more about it. So the idea is, can we give some of that power to the patient? Instead of only an expert, can we have machines also give something which is supposed to be neutral? And it's a big thing in India, to see that there is a neutral advice coming out of it. And then doctors are also human beings, so there are 1 in a million cases there are errors. So can we use technology to put checks and balances on top of that? For example, we are trying to build this thing on various images like CT scans, mammography, etc. Plain chest X-ray. For example, one of the most abused medical report is a plain chest X-ray. Every doctor recommends it. No one looks at it with care. A CT, everyone looks at it with care because there's a chance that there is something wrong. Now, even a CT, it has in US 250 images, in India 64 images. So a radiologist has to look at 64 images. And if there are 20 scans happening in a day, it is 1,200 images that he has to look at. So can you have a machine that can be a fail-safe on top of the radiologist? And then it pops up to the radiologist only the suspected ones. So that is something where we are trying to work on to look at the clinical data. And the good thing about clinical data is that data is constant across the world. A human body is a human body in any part of the world. So is it possible to build solutions that works on that?
Fantastic, thank you. I've been very politely told that I sit between the audience and the lunch, so we will try to wrap this up and see if there's two things that each one of you wants to tell the audience, right? And think about from a business side, from a revenue side, cost and effectiveness side, what would you tell them, right? And maybe Debjit, you can start. Yeah.
I'll just leave with two things. I think gone are the days when the analytics used to be done offline. I think move on to the real-time analytics because we have the opportunity to get the data very quickly. So do not wait for a couple of months to take revised decisions. Even in banking sector, I recollect in the early 2000s, we used to develop a model and we used to use it for an entire year and then recalibrate it. Now we have the power and the technology to do quick updates, change the parameters as and when it is required because customers behave very differently. They're very seasonal. That's one thing. That is, do it more frequently. The second is, which was static versus dynamic. The second is, again, offline versus online kind of a thing. So think about, do it more, mix the offline with the online data. Because many attributes are coming from the customers, which you all keep. Many attributes are generated real time. Use both the information together, offline plus the online thing, to take informed decisions. Don't just go with the offline or don't just go with the online. These are two things I will leave you with.
Sorry, I'll tell you something. It may sound slightly controversial. Whenever I talk about data and analytics with many people, the first statement that I hear is, I have a lot of data, what do I do with it? I think that's an absolute wrong way of starting. Tell me, I have a business problem, how can it be solved? It can, and then we will see what data is required and do we have that data or not. So please, let's not start with saying that I have lots of data, what can I do with it?
I have a quick thing that, with TiECON and, the entrepreneurship connected to it, there is a lot of potential for someone who is trying to think on the lines of, data scientist, or they want to get into, population health analytics or BI. And, you just have to, find out the right ways to get into it. But there's a lot of promise in the next 10 to 15 years for this particular field of business.
Wonderful. Maybe we'll open it out to one or two questions. I see already a few hands going up trying to get into the queue, but they'll be available offline as well. So why don't we start there and then address it to the panel? Yes.
First of all, thank you for providing me the opportunity to ask a question. Now my question is, if my data set, specifically a numeric data set, contains an outlier, then it might affect the analysis. So how to deal with such an outlier?
Maybe we can connect it offline just immediately after. You may hear a little bit technical things, others may get slightly put off with that.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's enough experience here to be able to give
Let's
you
just
a
connect
very good
immediately
answer.
after.
So, yeah. Outliers can be an issue. But outliers can become the norm also, so you have to be careful. Anyway.
Right, we'll take one question more and...
Yeah.
So I think either the answer was missed out or I missed the answer. What about the ethics part of the whole data analysis that we were doing, or we're doing currently?
Anyone of you wants to take up the question?
The privacy part.
Yeah.
See, one question about ethics, privacy, usage of data. The biggest question about data is who owns the data. At the end of the day, it's the customer whose data it is, that customer owns the data. The company does not own a data. I think a lot of confusion around ethics, privacy, etc. comes because companies think that they own the data. Companies are custodian of the data that the consumer has given to us. So I think that perspective solves a lot of the problem. So a lot of consent, what can be done, can your data be used for research, can your data be used for targeting you, can your data be used for anything else, etc., stems from that. And obviously there is a regulatory and compliance aspect of it, but from a philosophical aspect, I guess the biggest philosophical aspect that we should have in mind is it's the consumer who owns the data. The company is just the custodian of the data.
Thank you. I think we'll wrap this session up. Big hand for the panelists. I think they did a wonderful job. Feel free to ask questions offline, and we'll take it from there. Thank you.
Absolutely, we'll have the questions being taken offline. Ladies and gentlemen, right now we've got the mementos being presented by Prashant Halari, incoming president at TiECON Ahmedabad and CEO of Cineverge Technologies. Of course, these mementos are being sponsored by PCB Power. Let's give them all a big round of applause. Come on, everybody. What an exciting session this was. In the meantime, I'm reminding you about tweets and all right, ladies and gentlemen, just a reminder, where is everybody rushing? Settle on, wait, I have some very important announcements. Nice, brilliant. What a morning, what a good morning session it's been. Did you all have a good time in the morning? Very interesting sessions. Now what you saw in the morning, if it was good, what's going to come post lunch is going to be absolutely mind-blowing. So don't